Okay, so there is a number of important issues I want to talk about in this video, so please bear with me. Um, Today we've passed a grim milestone in the UK, some 10,000 deaths. I've mentioned that in the previous video. It's grim, uh, but we're obviously seeking to get the curve. Anyway, I don't want to talk so much about the domestic situation here because it's just depressing and there's a lot to be said about that, and I will of course comment on it later on. But for now, I want to talk about the situation with the director of the World Health Organization, China, the United States, and Taiwan, because this all comes into some deeper issues that are going on here. Um, every day we find out more information about, we find out something else exposing the Chinese regime for what it is. And the latest development is that Beijing is now trying to shackle research into the causes of coronavirus. Now, is this research from the United States or from Europe or from other countries? No, this is domestic research in China. Okay, Chinese universities. They're trying to tighten the grip on that sort of research because ostensibly it would make them look bad. Yeah, this is vital research that could prevent a future pandemic on this sort of scale. Let's not forget, of course, SARS began in China as well. So you would think that the Chinese government would have learned from that. They didn't. They temporarily closed the wet markets, but not permanently. Um, so I think coronavirus has been a massive embarrassment for the Chinese government. They know that. They are now on a massive PR campaign, and this is particularly with the United States, but I think we're going to see that this is something that we cannot sit on the fence with. It brings every country into it. I mean, we can't just look at this as a China-US schism because we are suffering. We are suffering from the Chinese cover-up. Now, I believe that every government does have its own responsibility to deal with the crisis as best they can. And I do think that there is valid criticism to be made of different governments. I think, for example, Trump's rhetoric on this, blaming the Democrats and fake news early on, his ridiculous statements, which would imply that he knows more than doctors do, those sort of things, Trump deserves all the criticism he gets. But on one area, Trump is right, and that's China. This business about suggesting that we hear from the left that Trump calling it the China virus is racist and it will somehow increased racist attacks is very contentious. For a start, the BBC called it the China virus, and I know that because I sometimes take photographs of the news as a sort of archival source. And I looked at photographs from a month ago, just over a month ago, before the first death in this country. It says China virus spreading around the world, our special report. So the BBC and most likely CNN were also calling it the China virus. They conveniently forget that now. Trump also said today that we want to protect our Asian American citizens. So, how anyone can associate racist attacks on Chinese people or East Asians with what the president is saying is pretty absurd. Look, I don't like Trump. I think a lot of the things he says is unstatesmanlike, unpresidential, and I hope he is defeated this year. I think he's been a pretty awful president in many ways. But one big area, one big policy area I think he has been right about is China. Um, and so is Mike Pompeo, as Secretary of State. They have taken a tough line on this, and it's necessary because whilst Trump may lie personally, the Chinese regime collectively are the world's biggest liars. I mean, they get the gold medal when it comes to lies. They've been lying to the Chinese people for 71 years. If they can get away with that, then of course they can't be trusted to tell the rest of us the truth. And my simple question would be, if they have nothing to hide, if they really believe they've handled this wonderfully, that's their official line, then why are they frightened of research? Domestic research. This isn't even American or French or British or German research. This is domestic research. So what are they hiding? Or what do they think they need to hide by trying to crack down on this research? That is a glaring question. Now, this issue about the the leader of the World Health Organization is kind of one of the offsets of tensions between China and the rest of the world. And basically, it comes down to the fact that the Ethiopian head of the WHO, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, says that he's been subjected to racist comments and death threats for months. Now, supposedly, he insinuates that these are coming from Taiwan. And the background to this is that Taiwan is angry because, due to China blocking Taiwan's application to be in the World Health Organization, it has been deprived of the sort of data that they need to try and handle the situation. Under the circumstances, they've done their best, and Taiwan has managed to control this pretty well. There's been relatively few deaths and cases. However, they're doing that amidst going up against the strength of Chinese influence at the World Health Organization. Now, Tedros made this rebuke to President Trump recently. He basically scolded Trump, not by name, but he said, for God's sake, 60,000 of our fellow world citizens have died. Actually, at that point, it was 81,000. But he was basically sort of talking like a angry head teacher telling off naughty students, like, oh, China and the US should just behave themselves. Here's the problem. It is irrefutable that early in this crisis, he was personally kowtowing to the Chinese leadership. Um, it is irrefutable that China has exerted significant influence at the World Health Organization, and it's irrefutable that early on in this crisis, the World Health Organization was officially promoting Chinese state lines as if they were facts. Chinese state lines, for example, about there would be no human to human transmission. This is very, very important because it demonstrates that the World Health Organization is buying silence, or at least buying positive PR at the World Health Organization, perhaps with investing a lot of money there, perhaps with some initiatives that they're doing within the World Health Organization. But the price of that is a lack of transparency. And in a pandemic, that matters. Because in those early weeks when the Chinese regime covered this up, when they famously punished the doctors for telling the truth and forced them to sign confessions, they could have immediately told the truth to the World Health Organization. They could have said, look, we have a situation here. We have a localized epidemic. We're telling you now in order we're being upfront so that other governments can prepare for this in case it turns into a pandemic. They never done that. So I think Trump is right to ask this question. What did the Chinese know, and what have they held back from the world? Um, as for this, people think that, oh well, look how benevolent the Chinese are being. They're working in the spirit of cooperation by sending medical equipment to Italy and Spain and Canada, and Britain, um, masks and so on. Well, firstly, a lot of this stuff is faulty anyway, so it's not foolproof as something that can be really be relied on as medically sound. Made in China, it's not the sort of standards that we really need to make sure our frontline medical staff are getting the best that they can. Um, and by the way, I'm not entirely saying the British government is blameless in this regard. I think Matt Hancock, for example, it was pretty disgraceful that he was effectively scapegoating doctors for supposed misuse of PPE. I think that's pretty disgraceful coming from the health secretary. But getting back to the source here, China, why are they doing that? Is it for some great humanitarian gesture? Is it for some great spirit of international cooperation? No, I think it's far more plausible that they're doing that just as positive PR. Oh, look how great we are working with the rest of the world. Um, and unfortunately, that PR campaign might win if, for example, the Americans don't sort of follow suit and share some equipment from the United States. The problem is the United States is now the global epicenter of cases, reported cases. so they have a crisis of their own. Um, but basically, what we're seeing with this is yet another standoff between China and the United States. And I think that we really, really need to be assertive with this. We need to see that we cannot trust the Chinese government. Whatever we think of President Trump, he could be out of office by the end of the year. American presidents come and go. The Chinese Communist Party stays in place. That's why when this finally ends, when we hit that curve, and when we start to get into a situation where the pressure on the NHS is lessened, GCHQ and MI6 have been warning about for a long time about the fact China can't be trusted, but the government hasn't really woken up to this, nor have our universities, nor has Ofcom. The government hasn't woken up because they're going ahead with the Huawei deal, at least they were before this crisis. Universities haven't woken up because they still accept millions in Chinese investment for supposed partnerships. But what it really means is we'll turn a blind eye to Chinese students bullying their Hong Kong peers. And it also means that, and I mentioned Ofcom, I'm personally very angry with Ofcom for failing to act against CGTN, for failing to strip their license. The Chinese regime should not be allowed the oxygen of publicity in free societies. If they're going to throw out reporters domestically, if they are going to harass Chinese citizens for calling for free speech, if they are going to behave like the arrogant dictatorship that they are, I don't see why we should give them any airtime at all. It doesn't matter that most people don't watch it. They shouldn't have headquarters in London at all. A network that's aired forced confessions? No way. So as for the racist comments against Mr. Tedros, I've seen some screenshots purporting to show this. Obviously, that's wrong. Whoever is making those comments, it's wrong. But there is no evidence that the Taiwanese leadership has sanctioned this. There's no evidence that they have in any way given the green light for this. Frankly, I wouldn't put it past the Chinese regime, being the world professional liars that they are, to set up such a situation. And I don't know how it would be done. I'm not a cyber security analyst or anything like that, but I wouldn't put it past them to rig up a situation to make the Taiwanese look bad. Like, oh, look how petty these Taiwanese racists are, attacking the WHO general, um, the director, I think is the formal title. Of course, those racist statements are wrong, whoever is making them. But he has questions to answer. He cannot say that he has been neutral on this when he has personally been pandering to the Chinese regime from the start. It definitely raises important questions. So for him to make that retort to Trump about, oh, let's grow up and let's all, work together, this really does raise serious questions about the power that the Chinese regime has in the World Health Organization. And this really matters because if they're not going to be transparent with their own people, how the hell can we expect them to be transparent with the rest of the world? We could see a situation like this again. We could come out of all of this later this year or 2021, and then there'll be a period where nothing happens. And 10 years from now, something like this could happen again. Not a damn thing will have been learned because the World Health Organization has allowed itself to be overly influenced by China. So there needs to be a rebalancing of that. The World Health Organization needs to be strictly neutral in terms of how it's how it basically corresponds to governments around the world. And I think they have been too China centric. I think Trump's probably right about that. If you look at the early stages of this pandemic, sort of statements WHO was making basically echoed that of the Chinese government, and it raises a lot of uncomfortable questions. That's not a conspiracy theory, there's evidence for that. So, of course, the racism is wrong, but I think that is basically um, someone actually described it as a Jussie Smollett sort of incident. In other words, that actor that claimed he suffered a racist attack in forget which city it was now, but later found out that he'd made the whole thing up. Now, I'm not saying Tedros is making up the racist abuse, but we don't know where that's coming from. It may be from Taiwanese, it may be from mainland Chinese. Whoever's doing it's wrong, but when he says do not politicize this virus, he has politicized it himself by pandering to the Chinese regime, and he needs to answer questions about that. And I still say each government will be judged on its own response, but we cannot get over the fact, we cannot downplay or make it secondary the fact that this began in China. The Chinese government covered it up. They didn't share, they were not fully transparent with the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization told their line. There are a lot of very important questions here as to China's role in this, and the arrogance, the sheer arrogance of the Chinese regime to now push conspiracy theories that it may not even have begun in China when the whole world knows that it did, when Chinese citizens know that it did, the long suffering people of Wuhan know that it did. You know, the sheer arrogance of that is sickening, quite honestly. It's like a rapist blaming his victim for what happened to her, i.e., the world is the victim and China is the perpetrator. That's honestly how I see it. This idea, oh, it's just a virus, um, it shouldn't be politicized. How it is handled, they may not have created it, but how they handled it is so critical to this. And we've seen how they handled it. They covered it up, they punished the doctors, they tried to make foreign scapegoats, and that is utterly despicable. But it's only in keeping of the nature of the Chinese Communist Party. They're cards. They won't take responsibility for anything. So instead, they have to punish people at home and scapegoat people abroad. It's absolutely abhorrent. And you just have to look at Chinese social media, Weibo or QQ, see the sort of state-sponsored propaganda that's on there. And unfortunately, a lot of people lap it up because they get into this mindset, oh, well, Western media is anti-China, so we must back our government. And unfortunately, it's a very deeply entrenched mindset over there. So, of course, racist attacks are wrong. Of course, any actual racist abuse against Tedros is wrong. I don't condone it. But I do think he has important questions to answer about his coziness with the Beijing regime. And I don't think he can rationally deny that.